Well, welcome back. So far, everything we've done has been predicated upon the assumption that we want to put things together two at a time, not three at a time. So when we've been analyzing arguments, we've really been focusing on two claims. How are these two claims related to each other? Or if we have like an inference indicator expression that has made us put two claims together as a clump, so we have like two different argument units, we've asked how are those two argument units put together? Not how are three things put together, but it's always been two at a time. But there are a couple of exceptions to that, and that's what I would like us to take a look at now. So let's turn our attention to number 7. George will either criticize philosophy or defend philosophy. If he criticizes philosophy, then he's doing philosophy. If he defends philosophy, then he's doing philosophy. What would you get? What would you conclude? What could you infer if you put these three premises together at a time? Don't worry about putting two of them together and concluding something. Think about what follows from all three of them. I'd like you to think about that for a minute, pause the video, and then once you are either pretty sure you see it or else have kind of given up, start the video. Okay, I wonder what it is. Do you think you see it or have you given up? Let's take a look at what this inference form would be. It's called a dilemma because it has an or statement, right? So it's like, it's a dilemma. I don't know which of those things it is. It's called a simple dilemma because no matter which of those two things it is, the outcome will be the same. So let's write this inference form in terms of P's and Q's and see if that might help you to see what follows from them. If you found it hard in English, you might not have found it hard in English, but sometimes people do. So let's symbolize it. First, we're going to have an or statement. So I will write down P or Q. That's one thing in a simple dilemma. Then we have an if-then sentence, right? If, then. What will the front part be? Well, let's see. The or statement here is George will either criticize philosophy or defend philosophy. So I'll make that yellow and blue. If he criticizes philosophy, so that is one of the things that is ORed. The technical term for those things that are ORed, the P and the Q here, or the yellow bit and the blue bit, are disjuncts, right? So if, not going to hold you accountable for that, but that's what they're called, disjuncts. If he, right? Then what? He is doing philosophy. So that is a new claim. So I'm going to give that another color. Everything is ugly, so I'll just make it red instead. Then he's doing philosophy. So it's a new claim, R. What would the next claim be in terms of P's and Q's and stuff? Well, let's see. If he defends philosophy, so what is that? That is the other thing that is ORed. It is the other disjunct. So I will make that blue so you can see the relationship. Then he is doing philosophy. Well, that's the same as the back part of the other if-then, so that's red. So in terms of P's and Q's and R's, it would be if, it's an if-then sentence again. But this time, the if part is the other or statement, Q. Then, well, the back part is the same as the back part for the first if-then, R. So in terms of P's and Q's and R's, that is the shape of those three premises, right? Therefore, now what would follow from that? Let's think about it in terms of letters. We either have P or we have Q. If we have P, we're going to get R. If we have Q, we're going to get R. So what will we end up with? Pause the video, think about that, and come back when you have decided or when you've given up. Okay, so let's think about it. Now, sometimes people find it easier to think about it in terms of English, and sometimes people find it easier to think in terms of letters. It doesn't really matter which kind of a person you are. Since I have to pick a side, I'm going to think of the letters first and then talk about the English. But you could talk about the English first and then think about the letters. That's fine. But let's think about this. It's either P or Q. It's going to be one or the other. If it's P, then we're going to end up with R. If it's Q, we're going to end up with R. So like either way, we're going to end up with R, right? There we go. That is a simple dilemma, and it's valid. So in terms of English, what would this be? Either George will criticize philosophy or defend philosophy. If he criticizes philosophy, then he's doing it. If he defends philosophy, then he's doing it. So it's like either way he's doing it, right? That's what follows. So George is doing philosophy. That's what follows. And I will make that red just so it's easier to see the relationship. There we go, right? Simple dilemma. We have an or statement. We have two if-then statements. The if-then statements are related to the or in such a way that the front part of the if-thens are the things that are or'd, and then the back part is the same. Okay, we'll see more of this. Let's go on to 8. Sarah will either subject her religious beliefs to philosophical examination, or else she'll accept them on the basis of faith alone. So we have another or statement. Or else and or, the same thing. If she subjects her beliefs, religious beliefs, to philosophical examination, then she runs the risk of discovering that her beliefs are indefensible. Do you see the relationship between this if-then and this or? The front part, again, is one of the things that are or'd. If she accepts her religious beliefs on the basis of faith alone, then she'll make herself vulnerable to a crisis of faith in the future. So again, you see the relationship? The if part, the front part of that if-then statement or that conditional, is one of the things that's or'd. So it looks very similar to what we just saw with the simple dilemma. So I'll write that down. We have an or statement. It's either P or Q. And we have an if-then statement. If P, then, haven't talked about the back part yet. And we have another if-then where the front part is the other thing or'd. If Q, then, and I won't talk about the then part just yet. Therefore, what? So what I would like you to do is think for a little bit about what we would have as the conclusion, either in the symbolization here or in the box here in English. Think about it whichever way you find the easiest. And if you're comfortable with both, great. Think about them both ways. Think about that, pause the video, come back when you have decided or when you're tired of thinking about it. Okay, because I find it easier to think in terms of letters than sentence parts, I'm going to start here and then go back to the argument in English. If you find it easier to start with the argument in English and then go to the letters, that's fine. It's just a matter of personal style. Let's take a look at what the back part is. She runs the risk of discovering that her beliefs are indefensible. She'll make herself vulnerable to a crisis of faith in the future. Those are different claims. So I'm not going to use red here. I'm going to make that a different color. I'll make that blue maybe. Okay. So that's different. I can have if P then R, if Q then S. The back parts are different. That, by the way, is why this is a complex dilemma. It's still a dilemma because we have that or statement. So the idea is I'm not too sure which of these options is going to actually obtain, it's a dilemma, but it's a complex dilemma because the outcome will vary depending upon which of those outcomes actually obtains. So what would follow from that? Well, let's think. Either we have P or we have Q. If we have P, then we end up with R. If we have Q, then we end up with S. So what do we end up with? Either R or S. Sometimes that can be hard to see because there can be a resistance to thinking that or statements can be genuinely conclusions, because sometimes it's hard to think of them as making any assertions, but they do make assertions. If I say either I will bring a salad or dessert to the potluck, I'm telling you something. You know that I'm not going to bring the main dish. I'll bring a salad or dessert. So now in English, what would it be? Well, Sarah will either subject her religious beliefs to philosophical examination, or she'll accept them on the basis of faith. If she subjects them to examination, then she runs the risk of thinking that they can't be defended. If she accepts them on the basis of faith alone, then she makes herself vulnerable to a crisis of faith in the future. So what? Well, either one thing or the other thing. Either this red bit or the blue bit. Like that. And I know I don't really technically need to change the color, but it feels cleaner. You see that? That is the other argument form where it makes perfect sense to add together 3 claims at a time. And in fact, if we were to try to think about which of these 2 claims should be added together and conclude something from that and then bring in the third, that's just a lot more complicated than just adding these things. The complex dilemma and the simple dilemma are the 2 exceptions to the 2 at a time rule. Those are the cases where we actually want to add claims together 3 at a time, not 2 at a time. So let's take a closer look at what those things are like. We can think about dilemmas as something that we would make with a recipe. There are certain ingredients. There's 3 of them because this is a 3-premise inference. One of the ingredients has to be an or statement, right? Either square or circle. The other 2 ingredients are the if-then sentences that take as their front parts the things that are ored. So if square then, if circle then. Note, I'm not even going to talk about what the back part is because it really doesn't matter. If the back parts are the same, we have a simple dilemma and we just conclude that. If the back parts are different, we have a complex dilemma, and then we conclude those back parts with an or in between, either back part 1 or back part 2. So those are the ingredients. How do we make a dilemma? Well, we combine them all, and this is important. Order doesn't matter. Normally, when people give a simple dilemma or a complex dilemma, they will state the or first because that's just more natural. But sometimes they might not. Sometimes they might state the if-thens first and then state the or. Under weird circumstances, they might state the if-then and then the or and then the other if-then. It doesn't make any difference in which order you put those ingredients into the bowl, as long as they all end up in the bowl at some point. When we think about processing the simple dilemma or the complex dilemma mentally, though, it does usually help to think about the or statement first. So no matter in what order the author says them to you, start when you think about it looking at the or statement first, if it's there. If it turns out that the back parts are the same, then we can conclude the back part, simple dilemma. If it turns out that the back parts are different, then we can conclude those back parts ored together, either back part 1 or back part 2. Graphically, I find it helpful to think about the ingredients of a dilemma, either simple or complex, as the or statement with the two if-thens intersecting it, right? That just kind of naturally shows, at least to me, how those claims hook together. Very good. When we move on, we are going to practice with simple and complex dilemma. I'll see you then.